The city was burning. Towering skyscrapers, once symbols of humanity's progress, crumbled under the force of the alien assault. Cloaked ships filled the sky, their invisible forms only visible through the glowing trails of destruction they left in their wake. The sound of explosions echoed in the distance, and the air was thick with dust and smoke. It was a nightmare come to life. Captain Elias Quinn, a seasoned soldier who had seen more battles than he cared to remember, stood firm at the front lines. His eyes were sharp, scanning the chaos as he barked orders to his team. They had no choice but to hold their ground. The enemy was relentless, their advanced technology overwhelming Earth's defenses. The soldiers, though outmatched, fought with the kind of determination that only desperation could fuel. "Keep pushing forward. We can't let them take the city," Quinn shouted, his voice cutting through the thick smoke. His squad, a tight-knit group of soldiers who trusted him with their lives, followed his lead without question. Suddenly, a crackling noise broke through the noise of the battle. The communication system in Quinn's helmet buzzed to life, and a distorted voice crackled through the static. "This is Lyra. Alien. Diplomatic. Urgent." Quinn froze. He had heard the name before, but never in the context of this war. Lyra, an alien diplomat, a member of the invading force. But why was she contacting them now, in the middle of the attack? His instincts screamed that it was a trap, but the urgency in her voice caught his attention. "Trapped. Hidden command center. Needs. Help." Before he could process the message fully, his commander's voice cut through the confusion. "Captain Quinn, get to the command center. Now. We've received word from Lyra. She's an ally. She's offering us a way to end this war." Quinn's eyes narrowed. An ally? This didn't make sense. The aliens had been invading Earth for months, destroying everything in their path. Lyra was one of them. But orders were orders, and he didn't have the luxury of second-guessing them now. "Understood," Quinn replied, his voice low and tense. "I'm on it." He turned to his squad. "Move out. We're heading into the heart of enemy territory." The team quickly geared up and followed Quinn as they navigated through the ruined streets, making their way toward the coordinates Lyra had sent. Every corner was a potential trap, but they had no choice. Time was running out, and they had to trust that this mysterious ally could offer them a way to turn the tide of the war. As they neared the alien command center, Quinn's heart raced. The building loomed ahead, its sleek alien design a stark contrast to the crumbling remnants of the city around it. He signaled for his team to take cover, and they approached cautiously, weapons drawn, eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. The door to the command center slid open with a hiss, and Quinn stepped inside, his boots echoing in the silence. He moved quickly, checking every corner for traps. But what he found inside was not what he expected. Lyra stood there, her slender form clad in the same advanced armor as the other invaders, but there was something different about her. She didn't look like the cold, calculating soldiers he had fought against. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her breathing was erratic, as if she had been through hell just to get here. She was human, or at least, not the heartless monster he had imagined her to be. "Lyra," Quinn asked cautiously, lowering his weapon but keeping it within reach. "What's going on here? Why are you asking for our help?" She looked at him with desperation in her eyes. "The invasion. It's not what you think. I was sent here by my people, yes, but I'm not one of them. I've been trying to stop this war from the inside. But the ones in charge, they're controlling everything. They're using an AI to guide the invasion. And it's destroying everything." Quinn's brow furrowed. "So why contact us now?" I can't do this alone. I need your help. If we don't stop the AI, this will never end. The invasion will continue, and Earth will fall." Quinn glanced at his team, who were clearly just as confused as he was. But there was no time for hesitation. The alien fleet was still hovering above, ready to strike again at any moment. A sudden crash of metal on metal rang through the room, and Quinn spun around, his heart racing. An explosion outside rocked the building, and Lyra jumped, her eyes wide with fear. Before Quinn could react, the door to the command center burst open, and a group of alien soldiers stormed in, their weapons aimed at the small group. "Move! Now!" Quinn barked, pushing Lyra ahead of him as his squad opened fire. The room erupted into chaos. Blaster shots streaked through the air, leaving scorch marks on the walls. Quinn and his team fought back fiercely, taking down alien soldiers with precision, but the numbers were overwhelming. In the chaos, Quinn noticed something strange. Lyra wasn't firing at them. She wasn't even trying to defend herself. She was hesitating, her eyes darting around as if she couldn't decide what to do. Then, without warning, one of the alien soldiers lunged at Quinn, aiming for his neck. Lyra's hand shot out, and she blasted the soldier with a burst of energy from her weapon, saving Quinn's life. He stared at her, his mind racing. She had just saved him. She had saved a human soldier, her enemy. Lyra turned to him, her face pale with fear. "We have to leave. Now." Quinn's mind was spinning. This was impossible. But as they fled the command center, fighting their way through the streets, one thing became clear to him. Lyra wasn't like the others. She wasn't a heartless invader. She was just a person caught in a war she didn't choose. As they ran, Quinn's hand brushed against hers, and for the first time, he saw the fear in her eyes, not for herself, but for the world she was losing. In that moment, something shifted inside him. Was it possible that humanity's enemy wasn't the one standing beside him? The truth was more complicated than he could have imagined. The escape wasn't easy. The alien soldiers pursued them relentlessly, but they managed to evade capture by taking a narrow alley and finding an abandoned building to hide in. Quinn leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. He glanced at Lyra, who was sitting against the floor, looking exhausted but relieved. "This doesn't make sense," Quinn muttered. "Why would you help me? Why would you help us?" Lyra looked up at him, her eyes filled with a strange sadness. "Because not all of us want this war. Some of us want to stop it." Quinn stood in silence for a moment, trying to process everything that had just happened. He had been trained to fight the aliens. He had been trained to see them as the enemy. But now, standing here with Lyra, that belief was crumbling. This wasn't just about good versus evil. It wasn't black and white. He had just saved an alien, and she had saved him. The doubt was there, creeping into his mind, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. Things were about to change. With the alien command center behind them, and nowhere else to go, Quinn and Lyra found themselves hiding in the ruins of a broken city. The once bustling metropolis, now nothing more than a smoldering wreckage, offered no shelter from the looming threat. As buildings collapsed and fires consumed the skyline, Quinn's instincts told him to keep moving, but the harsh reality of their situation made it clear that they had no choice but to wait. Quinn leaned against a cracked wall, his weapon still gripped tightly in his hands, his eyes darting across their surroundings. The sounds of distant explosions echoed in the background. He hadn't let his guard down, not for a second. Lyra sat on the ground, her back pressed against the debris of what used to be a thriving urban district. She seemed calm, but Quinn could see the anxiety in her eyes. "What now?" Quinn's voice was hoarse from the dust and adrenaline. Lyra glanced up, her face drawn, but determined. "We wait for the right moment. The alien soldiers will be looking for us, but they won't know exactly where we are." Quinn didn't respond immediately. He didn't trust her, not yet. She had saved his life in the command center, but that didn't mean she wasn't hiding something. He wasn't foolish enough to let his guard down just because she showed a few moments of hesitation. She was still an alien, part of the force that had ravaged Earth. "I don't understand," he said, his voice low. "You say you're not part of the invasion, but you came here with them. You're one of them." Lyra's gaze dropped to the ground. "I wasn't given a choice. I was sent here as a diplomat. part of a mission to negotiate peace. But when I arrived, I found out that the rogue faction had taken control. They manipulated my people into following their plan, using fear and control. She looked up, her eyes meeting Quinn's with sincerity. I want to stop this war, just as much as you do. Quinn shook his head, still skeptical. So why didn't you tell us this before? Why keep it a secret? Lyra's expression hardened. Because I didn't trust you. I knew you'd never believe me. I had to wait for the right moment to make my move. You're not the only ones caught in the middle of this. Quinn let out a breath, his mind racing. He wanted to believe her. He really did. But the weight of all that had happened, the lives lost, the devastation, was too much to overlook. He couldn't just forget everything that had been done to his people, to his world. Just then, a loud sound broke his train of thought. Quinn's hand instinctively gripped his weapon tighter. There was movement in the shadows. He signaled for Lyra to stay low and quiet, motioning toward an abandoned building across the street. They had to move. Before they could make their way to cover, a group of alien robots emerged from the shadows, their glowing eyes scanning the area. Quinn cursed under his breath. They had been spotted. Lyra's eyes widened in fear. We can't outrun them. We'll have to fight. The robots were advanced, heavily armored and equipped with devastating energy weapons. They were a perfect match for the alien soldiers, only more deadly and relentless. Quinn quickly assessed their position. There were 5 of them, all closing in fast. Stay close, Quinn said to Lyra, his voice firm. He dove into action, firing at the nearest robot. The shots hit its armor, sparking but doing little to slow it down. The robot returned fire, and Quinn dove to the ground, narrowly avoiding a blast that singed the air above him. Move, Quinn shouted, his heart racing. We need to take them down before they call for backup. Lyra, surprisingly agile, joined him in the fight. She picked up a discarded alien weapon and fired at another robot. The energy blast struck the robot's leg joint, sending it crashing to the ground. Nice shot, Quinn yelled over the sounds of the battle. But Lyra didn't answer. She was already moving again, rushing toward a second robot that had flanked them. Quinn followed her lead, taking down one of the robots with a well-aimed shot to the head. The robot crumpled, its glowing eyes flickering before going dark. They were making progress, but the remaining 3 robots were relentless. Quinn and Lyra fought side by side, each relying on the other's skills to stay alive. It was chaotic, the air thick with the sound of weapons firing, explosions, and the crunch of metal. For a moment, Quinn had to admit, despite his doubts, that he was impressed by Lyra's combat abilities. She fought like she had been trained for this, not like someone who had just joined the fight out of desperation. Quinn took cover behind a pile of debris as one of the robots advanced toward him, its weapon raised and ready to fire. He barely had time to react when Lyra appeared from the side, using an alien tech device to disarm the robot. It collapsed, its systems frying as the device overloaded. I thought you said you didn't know how to fight, Quinn teased, his heart still racing. Lyra smirked, but the expression quickly faded as another robot loomed in front of them. Desperate times, she replied. Just as the last robot charged at them, a deafening roar filled the sky. Quinn looked up, his eyes widening in horror. The alien fleet had begun its orbital bombardment, launching massive energy beams from space. They were making sure there was no escape for anyone left on the ground. The first blast hit the building to their left, sending debris flying. The shockwave threw Quinn and Lyra to the ground. The force of the explosion shook the earth beneath them, and for a moment, everything went silent. Quinn scrambled to his feet, his head spinning. His vision was blurred, but he could hear Lyra's voice, calling his name urgently. Quinn, we have to move. Now. He barely registered. They found refuge in an old, abandoned underground subway station. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the flickering lights above barely illuminated the dark, damp space. They collapsed to the ground. panting from the effort of escaping the chaos above. Quinn sat against the wall, his mind still racing. He glanced over at Lyra, who was sitting across from him, her face pale but determined. "Thank you," he muttered, barely able to believe the words as they left his mouth. Lyra gave him a small, tight-lipped smile. "You're welcome, but we're not out of danger yet." Quinn nodded, his gaze turning to the dim, flickering lights ahead. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: they would have to work together if they were going to survive. The bond that had started out of necessity was growing into something more. But with the alien forces closing in, time was running out. And above them, in the skies, the bombardment continued, a reminder that their battle was far from over. The journey ahead was treacherous. Quinn had seen countless battles, but nothing prepared him for the path they were about to take. After narrowly escaping the devastation of the orbital bombardment, Quinn and Lyra found themselves trudging through the barren wasteland of the city. The once thriving streets were now nothing more than a memory, a shell of what they had been. Buildings had collapsed, and debris scattered the ground like forgotten dreams. But despite the outward silence, the tension between them was palpable. Quinn hadn't fully trusted Lyra before, and after the chaos of the last few days, his doubts only seemed to grow. She had saved his life more than once, but the question of whether or not she was genuinely an ally still haunted him. She claimed to be fighting against the rogue faction controlling the alien forces, but could he really believe her? Lyra walked a few steps ahead, her gaze focused on the ground, her armor battered and worn from the constant fighting. It was hard to tell what she was thinking. Quinn had learned to read people in battle, to sense their emotions through their actions. But Lyra, she was an enigma, a mystery he couldn't quite solve. Her motives seemed pure, but the world was never that simple, was it? Then, one night, as they camped under the stars in the ruins of an old forest, Lyra broke the silence between them. They had spent most of the day traveling through hostile terrain, avoiding patrols, and staying hidden from enemy forces. They were exhausted, physically and emotionally. But as the orange glow of the setting sun bathed the landscape in a haunting light, Lyra spoke up. "Quinn," she began, her voice softer than usual, "there's something I haven't told you about why I'm doing this." Quinn glanced over at her, his brow furrowing. It was rare for her to open up like this. He had heard bits and pieces of her story, but it had always been vague, half-truths and guarded words. He didn't know what to expect, but something told him this was different. He couldn't ignore it. "What is it?" Quinn asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. Lyra took a deep breath, her eyes focusing on the horizon. "My home planet. It was destroyed by the same faction I'm trying to stop. They used the AI system to wipe out my people, to turn us against each other. They manipulated us into a war that we didn't want. I was sent to Earth as part of a peace mission, but by the time I arrived, it was already too late. The rogue faction had seized control, and there was no stopping them." Quinn felt a pang of sorrow for her, something he hadn't expected. In his mind, Lyra had always been the enemy. She was part of the force that had invaded Earth, part of the destruction. But now, hearing her story, he couldn't help but feel sympathy. She wasn't just a soldier, she was a victim too. He looked away, his own pain surfacing. He had lost so much in this war: family, friends, comrades. The destruction of his own world felt like a distant memory, but the weight of those losses was still heavy on his heart. He couldn't help but wonder if Lyra felt the same way about her home. But even in that moment of connection, Quinn remained cautious. They were still enemies, and trusting her could be a fatal mistake. "I'm sorry," Quinn said, his voice quiet. "I never knew." Lyra smiled faintly, though her eyes remained distant. "I didn't want you to know. I didn't want to seem weak. But now I have no choice. We're in this together." Quinn studied her for a moment, trying to process what she had just revealed. He had always seen the aliens as a faceless enemy, but Lyra was different. She wasn't just a soldier, she was a survivor. and that made her more human than any of the invaders he had fought against. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" he asked, his voice tinged with suspicion. "I couldn't," she replied, her tone low. "The others, your people, they wouldn't have trusted me. No one would have believed me. I had to prove myself to you first." Quinn nodded slowly, understanding now. It made sense. Trust was something that had to be earned in war, and Lyra had to fight for hers. After a long silence, Quinn looked up at the stars, his mind turning over the new information. The pain in his chest didn't go away, but for the first time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, there was hope for peace. It wasn't going to be easy, but with Lyra by his side, perhaps they could make a difference. "I trust you," Quinn said finally, his voice steady. Lyra turned to him, her expression unreadable. Then, after a moment, she nodded. "Thank you. It means more than you know." The conversation shifted from the past to the future, and as they sat there, the firelight casting long shadows on their faces, Lyra shared the information she had been holding back. There was a weapon, a way to end the war. It wasn't a bomb or a missile, but something far more powerful, an AI system that controlled the alien fleets. If they could destroy or disable it, the war would be over. The alien forces would crumble, and Earth would be free. But getting to it was no easy task. The AI was housed in a heavily fortified alien base deep within enemy territory, a place that no human had ever set foot in. Quinn's first instinct was to reject the idea. It seemed impossible, suicidal, even. But as Lyra explained the plan in more detail, he realized there was no other option. "We're running out of time," Lyra said, her voice firm. "This is the only way." Quinn's mind raced. The plan sounded insane, but so did everything else about this war. He had already lost so much. Maybe it was time to take a chance, to put everything on the line for one last shot at peace. "I'll do it," Quinn said, his decision final. Lyra gave him a grateful look, her expression softening. "I knew you would." The next morning, they set out once again. Their journey was perilous, the landscape scarred by the war that had torn the planet apart. The world they once knew seemed like a distant memory. But even as they moved forward, they found a new sense of purpose. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for a future. Over the next few days, they traveled through enemy territory, avoiding patrols and alien checkpoints. Their bond deepened with every mile, the trust between them growing stronger. It wasn't just about fighting anymore. It was about something more. One night, as they sat around a small fire, Quinn glanced over at Lyra. Her face was illuminated by the flickering light, and for a moment, she looked more human than alien. Her armor was dirty and battered, but there was a quiet strength in the way she held herself. Quinn realized, in that moment, that they were no longer just two enemies thrown together by fate. They were a team, and maybe even something more. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Quinn wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. He had Lyra by his side. And that made all the difference. The final stretch of their journey was the most dangerous. Quinn and Lyra were deep in enemy territory, and the alien base they sought to infiltrate loomed ahead like a fortress. The path had become increasingly treacherous, filled with traps, patrols, and enemy robots. Every step felt like a risk, and the tension between them was palpable. Quinn had come to trust Lyra, more than he had trusted anyone in years. Despite their past as enemies, despite the war that had torn their worlds apart, they had become something more than just allies. They had become partners in this dangerous mission. But deep down, there was a voice inside Quinn that kept whispering doubts. The alien forces weren't to be trusted, and neither was Lyra. Could she be hiding something from him? As they crouched behind a crumbling building, preparing for the final leg of their journey, Quinn's eyes drifted to Lyra's communicator. She had always been secretive about her tech, but Quinn had seen her use it countless times during their escape and fights. He had never paid much attention to it before, but today, Something about it caught his eye. It flickered briefly, and a strange icon appeared on the screen. Curiosity got the better of him. He quickly and quietly moved toward her. Watching this, she focused on the map of the base ahead. When Lyra wasn't looking, Quinn snatched the communicator from her side, his heart pounding in his chest. He hesitated for only a moment before unlocking it and scanning the data. What he found made his blood run cold. There, hidden among routine messages, was a covered transmission from the alien command. It was addressed to Lyra, and its contents were chilling. The message suggested that Lyra had never fully defected from the alien forces. It implied that she was still working with them, feeding them information, manipulating Quinn and the entire mission. Quinn's mind raced. Could it be true? Could everything that had happened between them, every moment they had shared, be nothing more than a lie? The trust he had placed in her, the bond they had forged, felt like it was crumbling beneath him. But the evidence was right in front of him. His anger flared, and before he could stop himself, he turned toward Lyra, confronting her with the communicator in his hand. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice low but intense. Lyra turned to face him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, she didn't speak, her eyes searching his face as if trying to gauge his intentions. But Quinn could see the flash of confusion in her eyes as she realized what he had found. "Quinn," she began softly, but her voice lacked the usual calm confidence. "It's not what you think." "Then explain it to me," Quinn snapped, his grip tightening around the communicator. "How long have you been playing me? How much of what you told me was a lie?" Lyra took a deep breath, her eyes flickering with something Quinn couldn't read. "I never lied to you. I swear." She stepped toward him, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "That message, it was planted by the rogue faction. They've been trying to manipulate us both, trying to make us distrust each other." Quinn's heart raced, but a part of him couldn't shake the doubt. Was she telling the truth? Could he really trust her after everything? The confusion gnawed at him. But before he could respond, the ground suddenly shook beneath their feet, and an explosion erupted in the distance. The alien base had detected their location. Without warning, the area around them exploded in a flurry of laser fire. Alien robots, massive and menacing, poured out from hidden bunkers, their guns blazing. Quinn instinctively pulled Lyra to the ground as more blasts tore through the air, sending debris flying in all directions. "This isn't a coincidence," Quinn shouted over the chaos, his voice full of urgency. "They know we're here." Lyra didn't hesitate. She quickly grabbed her weapon, her face set with determination. "We need to get to cover. We'll talk later." Together, they sprinted through the ruins, dodging blasts and weaving between crumbling structures. Quinn could feel his heart pounding in his chest. The world around him had become a blur of explosions, the sky lit with the flames of burning buildings and the flash of energy blasts. But even in the chaos, he couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal gnawing at him. Was Lyra really on his side, or had she been playing him from the beginning? As they ducked behind an overturned vehicle, Quinn stole a glance at her. Lyra was already taking action, her eyes scanning the battlefield, calculating every move. She didn't seem like someone who was betraying him. She looked like a soldier, like someone who had been through hell and back. In the distance, Quinn saw a massive robotic war machine advancing on their position, its metallic body glinting in the firelight. It was heavily armored, its weapons aimed directly at them. Without a second thought, Quinn raised his weapon and fired, but his shots bounced off the war machine's thick armor. They were outmatched. "Get down," Lyra shouted, pulling Quinn to the ground just as the robot fired a barrage of energy blasts. Quinn watched in disbelief as Lyra began to move toward the robot, her eyes focused, her movements swift. He couldn't understand what she was doing at first, but then he saw it. Lyra was using alien tech, an energy device that he hadn't seen her use before. In one swift motion, she attached the device to the robot's legs, and the machine froze. its movements jerking as the tech short-circuited its systems. The robot struggled to move, sparks flying from its joints. With a final burst of power, the robot collapsed, its armor cracking apart. Quinn stared at her, his mind racing. What did you just do?" Lyra turned to him, breathing heavily but with a small victorious smile on her face. "I told you. The message was a lie. They're trying to turn us against each other." Quinn's heart was still heavy with doubt, but watching Lyra in action, seeing her save him once again, made him realize the truth. She was on his side. The rogue faction had used her, manipulated her, just as they had manipulated him. They were both pawns in a larger game. But now they had a chance to take control of their fate. "We need to keep moving," Lyra said, her voice filled with urgency. "We're not out of the fire yet." Quinn nodded, his resolve hardening. For the first time in days, the uncertainty faded, replaced by a clear sense of purpose. He had been betrayed, but not by Lyra. The real enemy was the rogue faction, and they were the ones who had to stop it. Together, they fought their way to the alien base. The battle was far from over, but now, Quinn knew he wasn't alone. Lyra was with him, and no matter what happened, they were going to finish this, together. The air was thick with tension as Quinn and Lyra reached the heart of the enemy base. The final mission loomed before them, the fate of both their worlds resting on the success of this daring plan. The walls around them pulsed with a strange energy, a reminder of the immense power they were about to confront. They had come this far, through betrayal, near-death experiences, and impossible odds, but this was the moment that would define everything. Lyra led the way, her movements swift and purposeful, but Quinn could see the anxiety in her eyes. She was scared, not for herself, but for what lay ahead. The facility was enormous, an intricate web of alien technology, humming with an ominous energy. It was unlike anything Quinn had ever seen. Towering machines and glowing conduits snaked through the walls, pulsating with life, as if the very building was alive. "We're almost there," Lyra said, her voice tense but steady. "The AI core is just beyond this chamber." Quinn nodded, gripping his weapon tighter. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. The plan was simple: disable the AI that controlled the alien fleet, and the war would end. But there was a catch. Getting to the core required someone to manually upload a virus into the system, and the process was fatal. Whoever went in would not survive. Lyra's face was pale, her hands trembling slightly as she ran a diagnostic on the terminal in front of her. The weight of the decision hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Quinn glanced at her, his heart heavy with a mixture of fear and determination. He knew what the plan required. They both did. But the thought of losing her, of losing the only person who had truly been by his side in this hellish war, was more than he could bear. "I'll do it," Quinn said, his voice firm, even though his mind screamed with protest. "I'll go in. I'll upload the virus. It's the only way." Lyra's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide with horror. "No, Quinn, you can't. I won't let you do this." Her voice cracked with emotion, the depth of her love for him clear in every word. For the first time since they had met, Lyra was no longer the stoic, calculating alien diplomat. In that moment, she was just a woman, terrified of losing the one person she had come to care for. "You don't understand," Quinn said, his voice softer now. "I have nothing left. This is the only way to end this madness, to stop the war, to make sure no one else has to suffer. I'm ready to make this sacrifice. Quinn, please." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was enough to stop him in his tracks. "I don't want to lose you. I've lost too much already." Quinn's heart ached as he saw the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. This wasn't just about duty anymore. It was about love, and he could feel the weight of her feelings crushing down on him. He had never thought he would be in this position, standing on the precipice of life and death, with someone who had become more to him than he could have ever imagined. Lyra took a step forward, her resolve hardening. She took his hand in hers, her fingers trembling slightly as she gazed into his eyes. "I love you, Quinn, and I'm not going to let you die. I'll do it. I'll upload the virus. I'll be the one to make the sacrifice." Quinn's eyes widened in disbelief. "No, Lyra, you can't." "Yes, I can," she interrupted, her voice steady. "This is my choice. You've done enough already. You've saved me. You've given me hope. I won't let this war continue, and I won't let you die because of it. I love you too, Quinn. And if this is what it takes, then I will do it." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. And for a moment, Quinn didn't know what to say. He wanted to protest, to convince her that he was the one who should go, that he couldn't bear to lose her. But deep down, he knew that this was the only way. She was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for the greater good, and he had to respect that. They shared a long, quiet moment, the weight of their feelings hanging between them. The world around them seemed to fade away as they stood together in the silence, the finality of their decision settling in. Then, Lyra took a deep breath and nodded, her face resolute. "I'll go," she said softly. "Stay here. Keep them off me." Quinn couldn't find the words to argue anymore. He just nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He watched as Lyra turned and walked toward the glowing entrance to the AI core, her movements slow but determined. Every step felt like an eternity, each one taking her closer to her fate. The base trembled, the walls shaking as if in response to their actions. Quinn could feel the tension in the air, the hum of the alien tech growing louder. He couldn't stop himself from following her, even though he knew it was futile. He had to be there, to support her in whatever way he could. "Lyra," he called, his voice desperate. "Please, come back to me." She turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and love. "I will, Quinn. In my heart, I'll always be with you." With that, she stepped into the core, disappearing into the shimmering light of the alien technology. Quinn's heart pounded in his chest as he stood frozen, helpless. The seconds felt like hours, and every second felt like an eternity as he waited, praying for her to return. The moment Lyra entered the core, the entire facility seemed to shudder, and then, with a deafening roar, the building erupted in a fiery explosion. The ground trembled beneath Quinn's feet, and the sky above was consumed by a fiery blaze. His heart stopped as he watched the explosion unfold, the shockwave sending him sprawling to the ground. For a brief moment, Quinn could hear Lyra's voice over the comms, faint but clear. "I love you," she whispered, her words carried on the wind, just as the explosion consumed everything around them. The alien fleet, so powerful and seemingly invincible, began to falter. Ships that had once moved with terrifying precision now swerved and collided, their control systems failing one by one. The invasion collapsed in an instant, the rogue factions' hold over the galaxy shattering with Lyra's ultimate sacrifice. Quinn lay there, his heart breaking, knowing that Lyra had given everything for the survival of their worlds. The war was over, but at what cost? The pain of her loss was unbearable, but in the midst of that pain, there was also a strange sense of peace. They had done it. They had won. And as the dust settled, and the fires of the enemy fleet faded into the distance, Quinn knew that Lyra's love, her sacrifice, would never be forgotten. The celebrations on Earth were overwhelming. The air was filled with the sound of cheering crowds, and the sky above shimmered with the glow of fireworks. Victory was finally theirs. The alien fleet lay in ruins, the rogue faction that had sparked the war now defeated. Earth had won, and humanity could breathe a collective sigh of relief. The world would rebuild, and life would go on. But for Captain Elias Quinn, the hero who had led the charge against the invaders, the weight of victory felt like a heavy stone pressing down on his chest. The cheers, the medals, the parades, they all felt hollow to him. He had saved the world, but he had lost something much more important. Lyra, the alien diplomat who had sacrificed everything for the cause. The woman who had shown him love, the woman who had fought by his side and given her life to end the war. She was gone. Quinn stood alone on the balcony of a government building, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The earth was at peace, but in his heart, there was only emptiness. The stars above twinkled like distant beacons, but they didn't seem as beautiful as they once had. They reminded him of the quiet moments he had shared with Lyra, the way she had smiled at him, the way her touch had comforted him in the darkest of times. She was gone now, and the world had been saved, but at such a tremendous cost. He clenched his fist, the small token from Lyra resting in his palm. It was a necklace, a simple piece of alien technology that she had worn around her neck. She had given it to him as a reminder, a promise that their love would live on even after the war ended. Now, it was all he had left of her, and it was all he could hold on to. The city below him buzzed with excitement, but Quinn felt detached from it all. He had been hailed as a hero, given medals and honors, but none of it mattered. How could it, when the person he cared about the most was gone? How could he celebrate when his heart ached with the weight of her loss? His mind drifted back to the final moments in the enemy base, the explosion, the flash of light, and Lyra's voice, whispering her love to him one last time. He had never imagined that their story would end like that, with her giving everything for the future of two worlds. But she had. And now, all he had were the memories of the time they had shared, and the hope that one day, humanity could achieve peace with her people. Quinn's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned, and a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Sergeant Bonner, his longtime friend and comrade. Bonner had fought alongside him during the war, and though Quinn had never been one for heroics, Bonner had always been the one to push him forward. "Hey, Captain," Bonner said, his voice rough with emotion. "You okay?" Quinn didn't answer at first. He simply stared out at the city, his mind lost in thought. Bonner took a few steps forward, stopping beside him. He, too, had been through the hell of war, and though he had survived, he had lost his own comrades along the way. They both knew the cost of victory, and neither of them felt like celebrating. "You know," Bonner continued, "they've been calling you a hero down there. A lot of people owe you their lives." Quinn shook his head. "I didn't save them, Bonner. Lyra did." Bonner's expression softened. He had seen Quinn change over the course of the war, had witnessed the bond between him and Lyra grow into something powerful and unbreakable. It had been the driving force behind everything Quinn had done, and it was that bond that had ultimately led to their success. "Yeah," Bonner said quietly, "but you gave her the chance to save them. You led the charge. You kept going, even when the odds were stacked against you. That's what makes you a hero." Quinn remained silent, his gaze still fixed on the distant horizon. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had lost everything, like a soldier who had completed his mission but couldn't bring himself to accept the victory. Bonner sighed, looking up at the sky. "I know it's hard. It's hard for all of us. But what you did, what you and Lyra did, it matters. You gave us all a future." Quinn nodded, though the words didn't bring him any comfort. The future was uncertain, and he wasn't sure what it held. The war was over, yes, but the scars of it remained. The loss of Lyra was something he couldn't shake, and the idea of moving forward without her felt impossible. "Thanks, Bonner," Quinn said quietly. I need some time." Bonner gave him a sympathetic nod. "Take all the time you need, Captain. We'll be here when you're ready." As Bonner turned to leave, Quinn stood alone once more, the sounds of the celebration growing louder behind him. He looked down at the token in his hand, the necklace Lyra had given him. It felt like a piece of her still lingered in his palm, a connection that refused to be severed, even by death. He closed his eyes, letting the cool night air wash over him. For a brief moment, He allowed himself to imagine a future where peace was possible, a future where humans and Lyra's people could coexist, where the pain of the war could be forgotten, and the memory of Lyra's sacrifice could inspire a new era of understanding. In the depths of space, far beyond the reach of Earth's sensors, a lone alien ship drifted through the void. Its engines hummed with a quiet power, and inside, a single occupant stood at the controls. The ship was empty, save for one, a survivor of Lyra's people. She had been sent on a mission, one that could change the course of history. As the ship continued its journey into the vast unknown, the stars shimmered around it, a reminder of the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. Perhaps one day there would be peace. Perhaps one day the humans and the surviving members of Lyra's species could come together to rebuild. The legacy of Lyra's sacrifice would live on, and the future would be shaped by the hope she had given to the world. But for now, as Quinn stood alone under the stars, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the loss. Lyra was gone, but her love, her courage, and her sacrifice would never be forgotten. And with that thought, Quinn allowed himself a small, quiet hope. Perhaps one day, peace could truly be achieved between humanity and the surviving members of her people.